I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. So did you enjoy yourself on our little tour of Ireland?
I did. It was great, you know. It was it was really it was really exciting, wasn't it, to get on the road and do it.
I'm going to use the classical interviewer's tactic.
What's that now?
Silence.
Yeah, is that it?
So if I don't say anything, you have to keep talking, and
no.
you might come out with something yourself.
I won't.
I'm not allowed to. I'm not.
No. What about yourself, Nicola? I'll use the classic politicians.
Yeah. Go on.
Interview technique. Answer a question with a question. Did you enjoy it yourself?
Yes, I did, Niall. Thank you very much for asking. I certainly did enjoy it, and I look forward to the next one.
Yes.
But I suppose, the age-old, certainly in journalism and maybe many other careers, isn't it what goes on the road stays on the road?
What goes on the road stays on the road.
Yeah.
Nicola.
It's the golden. It's like ratting. If you rat.
Look, Omerta.
I'm going to rat the guys in the office, though. I'm actually ratting. I'm going to actually put together a special presentation.
Of my most embarrassing moment.
Of your most embarrassing and ludicrous and surprising moments.
Yeah.
And I have certain photographs I'll be using in this sort of audio-visual slide. I could actually run a competition.
I can live with that in the office.
10 lucky listeners can win a seat at the...
Yeah, I can live with that in the office.
Can you?
Because my co-workers have such low expectations of me.
Yeah.
But it's not for public consumption.
That's okay.
Yes.
Well, look. So, Thomas Maher and somebody that came on our kind of radar without us knowing anything about him when he was one of the first guys that was being brought before the courts on the Encrochat charges in the UK. He was arrested, of course, and identified around the time that those poor migrant workers were found in the back of the truck driven by Mo Robinson. He was the registered owner, I think, of that truck, had sold it to a guy called Ronan Hughes in Monaghan, and it had ended up being driven by Robinson, and those poor people lost their lives in the back of it.
So the Vietnamese illegal immigrants died in the refrigerated truck.
In Essex, wasn't it?
In Essex. So, and Thomas Maher's name then appeared in the media. He had bought the truck, and
Not sure it did.
Well, it did actually.
I don't think he was named at that time, was he? Because
no,
I do recall trying to find out information about him, and he was a nobody to us. We didn't know who he was. We managed to find out that he was originally from Offaly and that he was living in the north of England with his wife. But were we in a position to name him?
Well, he did an interview down with the British media in the days after where he said, look, I knew nothing about it.
Right.
I'm absolutely disgusted.
I just sold the truck.
Yes,
basically.
Exactly. And, I'm an innocent guy. And then there was people were remarking online, look at the house he's living in, which was quite spectacular. And, all of a sudden...
Things started coming together. What he didn't realise was that the phone he was using was one of those Encrochat phones that were hacked. There was a live hack that went on for a couple of months by the French and the Dutch police after they cracked the code into it and they began to listen in to the gangland's phone network of choice. And he was one of the people that believed that it was literally a bulletproof communication system for him. And he sent many messages. I think his handle from memory was satirical. And he had sent photographs that were incriminating and that linked him to the phone, including photographs of his feet.
Yeah.
Which is gross. Who wants photographs of anyone's feet?
Look, not me. No, I think it was he obviously he was arrested initially as part of the investigation into the Vietnamese, but he was never charged, and he certainly wasn't any direct involvement in any of that. But really, what you found out was that he'd been involved in criminality for decades, really. Like, he doesn't look the part of a gangster, does he? And not the character of a kind of multimillionaire drug trafficker. I mean, something opposite to that. But what you really see was, he had been on the police radar even when he was from Clara and Offaly originally. He'd been on the police radar even back in a couple of decades ago. He was a logistics guy So he was a haulier. He ran haulage firms, but you find that what really he was doing was he had that specialist role for drug trafficking gangs through Ireland and UK, that he was involved in the movement of both cash and of drugs across the UK and Ireland as a freelancer, but also working largely for the Kinahan cartel in recent years.
And members of the Hutch organisation had also used him, and a clear sign that when it comes to business, don't take sides maybe. He was somebody who ran the haulage firms himself, and obviously transport is one of the key parts of any organised crime gang. It's extremely important.
Yeah.
If you were taking a role as director of transport, it would be up there with the CEO. They have to get the product from A to B or they have nothing. And he not only did that, but he often used to put gangs in touch with truckers willing to transport their wares. And for that simple, fixer role, giving a number over, he always took his cut. He was supposed to be as mean as hell. He'd take about $3,000 for putting somebody in touch with a guy who could move an item for them.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, it's a hugely, if you think about it, and as well, it's the movement back then. So you're getting drug shipments delivered to people. They have to pay for those drugs really in cash. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways and, Bitcoins and all of this that are going to become more and more popular and more important as time goes on. But largely it's a cash business. So there's, if you talk about something like $500,000 million, which is certainly the scale at which he was dealing with, that money has to come back. And that's a huge risk for a start. That's one of the big risks for the criminal gangs. And it's one of the most important bits. So he was also heavily involved in the movement of, say, cash from Ireland back to the UK and back to wherever it was ultimately going to go.
He was doubling his risk, but he was also doubling his money because he would have got paid for the transport in each direction. So again, that seems to be part of his makeup, that he is extremely sort of tight and mean and always on the make, always trying to, make an extra 10 grand or whatever. And of course, they had a lifestyle to fund, himself and his wife, Joanna, because, as you point out, as soon as he named himself rather than the media naming him as such during the investigation into the Vietnamese people. But people were looking, wow, that's some house. And it was. And he had he had a big house. He had another house, it was believed, in Spain. They had very fancy cars out in the driveway. She was registered as a hairdresser and he as a haulage firm boss. And he told everybody within his neighbourhood, anyone who cared to listen, how hard he'd worked for his money and for everything he had. And, the usual trappings, expensive watches, collections of jewellery, foreign holidays, everything that other criminals really spend their money on, they were doing the same. But of course, the phone did him in, and it was actually, his case was actually the only activity in the south of Ireland relating to EncroChat.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, obviously we've spoken about this, and you've obviously done extensive podcasts on EncroChat.
I have a bee in my bonnet.
You have, you do. So, but the EncroChat, Thomas Maher was done quite quickly, and he was one of the I suppose, the first major scalps from the EncroChat hack by the UK, or by intelligence given to the UK authorities. So they revealed he used EncroChat freely and without any restraint on it, spoke about drug dealing. I think they ultimately, he was convicted in connection with the delivery of at least 21 kilograms of cocaine from the Netherlands, and then ultimately transported through the UK and back in Ireland.
And the Irish Gardai were involved in the seizure of that drugs and money.
Yes, and the EncroChat messages included stuff like him telling somebody, I'm at this game for the last 20 odd years, pal, and I'm not an overnighter. I know the way of plays. And then he had a couple of people back in Ireland here that have been linked to him, that played a similar role for his Irish operation. Two guys in particular, Jason Reid and Thomas Rooney, who've both been dealt with by the courts and are both serving sentences now. They were regarded as his guys in Ireland.
They were done for money laundering, were they?
They were done for money laundering offences.
So you have some of the messages from the phone that were, some of them anyway, that were read out to the court. And of course he pleaded guilty because he pleaded guilty when his case came before the courts, and he was the first conviction for that massive EncroChat investigation in the UK. And he pleaded guilty because he is in poor health, and he really didn't fancy going into prison, and he really fancied, minimising his sentence that he was going to have to serve. But do you have anything about his feet?
They don't mention his feet. They don't.
No.
They seem in these.
There's no message. I just wonder who.
You would have thought they would have led off the court.
Chiropodist he was sending the picture to, or was it?
Would it be chiropodist? Would that be or podiatrist or?
No. You actually never.
No, I'm not
chiropodist.
Yeah. Right. Okay. No, they don't focus on the feet, but we will.
I'm not so sure of myself now.
Well, we won't fight live on air, but we'll have a look into it and see who's right.
We'll have to press.
But no, look, he during the trial, you heard information, for example, about about how the effect of the lockdown had on them, which of course, like, it stopped their movement, but trucks were still coming freely in and out of the country. There are probably less of them, obviously, but he tweeted about, or he texted about it, saying, once we get this travel ban lifted, we'll be laughing, mate. I'm telling you, that's why I'm not stressing yet. So there was all this constant chat about it, and he spoke about which are the best ports and all of those types of things. I mean, ultimately, he was convicted and pled guilty at quite an early point, and he was back in court then this week.
Well, he got 14 years now. In the UK, what usually happens is, because it does operate different to here, they'll serve half of that.
Yeah.
And then half on licence. So he's been in jail since 2020,
wasn't it?
2020. Was he taken into custody then?
He was taken into custody. Now, he may have, I'm not sure if he served some time in remand, but he was convicted in 2020.
Okay, so he probably would have served some time in remand. So
Possibly.
he possibly has maximum he has left is 4 years in jail, and the minimum is 3. But what happens in the UK is, when somebody is convicted of a criminal offence, they immediately kick into action the proceeds of crime case against them. Their proceeds of crime, while their legislation is the same, they're not as proactive as they are here, as the Criminal Assets Bureau are here. Sometimes you see the Criminal Assets Bureau go after people who don't actually have convictions.
Yeah.
But in the UK, by and large, they don't tend to go for them until they've that conviction.
Right.
And at that point, they're asked to basically give the court the full list of their assets.
Yeah.
So it's up to them. The onus is on them to give up the full list. And if they're discovered to have left some out, they can
get fined again
or whatever.
Yeah.
So what usually happens is, and probably what's happened in this case, is he has detailed some of his assets. I don't think any criminal is going to give every little bit of, they're going to hide something in the attic or something in a territory abroad. I mean, we don't know exactly, did he give up this supposed house he has in Spain or any of the money he has there. But nonetheless, they had that home in England. There was jewellery seized from that home, and it was at the time said to be worth hundreds of thousands of euro. Now, probably on purchase, second hand, obviously, is going to reduce the price of that. Collections of his and hers designer watches. But this proceeds of crime case has culminated this week in, I think he's after being fined.
Yeah, he has to hand over basically 630,000 sterling, which is about 724 euros. 24,000 in euros, and that includes the house, cars, jewellery, also gold ingots. So, and they also the trial had heard how they had this extravagant lifestyle on spend 90,000 on holidays over just a 3-year period. So he has to give that up. If he doesn't give it up within 3 months, he gets an extra prison sentence, and that's, I'd say, nearly all the visible assets available.
If he doesn't pay that money, in the UK again, what happens is, if they don't pay up the fine and there is a deadline given, and he doesn't have to hand over his house, he can pay up, he can come up with the money and pay that. That's a settlement, essentially, that they've reached, that they've agreed to. But if he doesn't pay it, they will then add time onto his sentence.
Yeah.
And you can imagine a guy like him, who's in bad health, who really is unhappy within the prison system, doesn't like it, hasn't been in very much over his life, and is in poor health. He is going to want to get out, so you'd imagine that bill will be paid. And that'll be a second blow really to him and to the family.
Yeah, I mean, that's in a way he could probably walk away now and pay that up and walk away. But I mean, the scale of his operation was quite staggering really when you think about it. I mean, it just shows you how organised crime really works, in that you'll have, Daniel Kinnan or these people at the top of the ladder with a public profile, with a profile on the streets, who people know, and people maybe have a fear within the community. But there's all these other sort of guys who are really motivated by money, I think, rather than being a big shot or driving around in fancy cars and, having people fear them in the local community. There's all these other guys like Thomas Maher who really make it work. And, a large part of drug trafficking is driven by logistics. Like, it's kind of that is the skilled bit of it, really, isn't it? Getting
it's been
stuff
described
around.
to me on numerous occasions as the transport routes, and the ability to transport is probably the most important part, next to the actual production of the cocaine. You know what I mean? By those barons in wherever you're buying from, Colombia, Peru, or whatever. Yeah, that control that. The next most important role is the transport.
Exactly, and the guys on the streets going around on with in the streets of Dublin with Rolexes and the works. I mean, they really are the small fry. Like, if you think about what Maher was, so during I think it was over a 7-month period, the NCA in England investigated him. So it's really a snapshot of his criminal career, relating to these EncroChat messages. Like, this is not the bulk of his stuff, but even within that time, they watched a meeting. It said at the time they watched a meeting with criminal associates at hotels and in public spaces in the UK to arrange trafficking of cocaine from Holland. He also facilitated large movements of cash across the continent. He arranged 300,000 to be transported from Ireland to Holland on behalf of one of his associates, who he charged a commission for his involvement. Ultimately, as part of that investigation, Gardai and Drogheda seized 600,000 in transit and arrested 3 people who were all convicted, and that includes Thomas Rooney, who was kind of his right-hand man in this country.
So that was a kind of a live sting operation between the NCA and the Irish Garda Síochána. And unfortunately, the Gardaí could have done a huge amount more with the EncroChat information, but they weren't handed it on down the ranks down to the local officers in the areas, affected by the criminality or the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. I mean, you can see how efficiently they worked with their NCA colleagues on that. Yeah. And, there was no screw up there at all. They just moved in on them at the right time. So, there was a lot of lost opportunities, I think, during that time in EncroChat. We still see hundreds of people coming before the courts in the UK. And of course, as we mentioned briefly in a previous episode, there was a challenge made to the EncroChat information being used in courts, and that has failed. Yeah. And
also you see people like Thomas Rooney not taking the chance on challenging Thomas Maher not taking a chance on challenging it, but pleading guilty, which is a thing that you can't really take back.
No, of course not.
Like, he's taken a decision to serve 7 years or so behind bars. The evidence is presented to him, and he's gone for it. And that's the other thing, that, whether EncroChat ultimately somebody manages to overturn it or not, those convictions where people have pled guilty are going to remain no matter what.
They are, and also you see what you'll see going through the courts, and you're seeing the stuff coming in on the news desk all the time. A lot of them were caught red-handed. Yeah. And that's another thing that you can't really go, oh, well, you shouldn't have been listening, in the first place. I mean, you're actually caught with your hands on the product. Yeah. So a lot of them either who've pleaded guilty or who've kind of gone for it and pleaded not guilty, the evidence against them is overwhelming. And it's not just the, that communications evidence. It's more than that.
Exactly. And you see the working through of these, the complications of, saying the which they say is the original source is poisoned, or however they describe in these appeals. But you see that with some of the appeals that are going through the Supreme Court in Ireland, where even if the original source is poisoned, or that's accepted by the court, And an example would be, the surveillance tapes of Jerry Hutch, where they can say, well, this is obtained illegally, but we're still going to hear it. So that doesn't necessarily lead to these automatic people getting off, So Thomas Maher, has obviously decided, I'd say, not to accept this judgment, to not to go appeal it again and again. And, it's...
He's someone who doesn't take a huge amount of responsibility for his own actions, even though, of course, he did plead guilty.
Yeah.
But that was to reduce the sentence. He was involved in something behind bars that he sort of went for, or tried to have Ronan Hughes attacked.
Yeah, so Ronan Hughes is the guy convicted in relation to the deaths of the 39 migrant workers from Vietnam. So while he was in prison, Thomas Maher was issuing threats to him through associates. I suppose it shows you, while Maher was primarily a transport man, he still had the connections and the depth of involvement in organised crime, that he was still willing to, at least at this point, threaten violence. It didn't ultimately end up in any conviction, but I suppose it just shows you are dealing with dangerous people.
Yeah, and what was his point in that?
Well, I mean...
He'd just fallen out. He wanted to have him stabbed or beaten up in prison. Maher, of course, by the way, his nickname was King of the Road. And that was given to him by the criminal gangs,
yeah,
to call him that. But he wanted him beaten up in jail as he waited extradition proceedings to the UK for the manslaughter of 39 immigrant workers.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, Thomas Maher was never charged in connection with this, but there certainly was a lot of paranoia at that point going on about, Ronan Hughes and what him and Mo Robinson, what they were going to say or what they were not going to say. So we don't know exactly why.
He was afraid, obviously, he was going to be linked to that, if we believe it to be the case.
Yes.
The suspicions, but he obviously didn't want to face further criminal charges in relation to anything, because he was so anxious to get out of prison himself.
Exactly, but it does show you, this is what you're dealing with. And of course, all of these people, if they are, as he said himself, been in this game 20 years, the threat of violence has to come with that as well, the ability.
Do you know what I find interesting? I mean, you make the distinction between the likes of Daniel Kinahan, he's up there at the very top of the tree, and the likes of, Thomas Maher, and others on the streets.
Yeah.
They live the same life in that they, relatively speaking, okay, so they've different amounts of money to spend, but you look at him and this successful business he'd built up, and he was greedy for the money. There was so much money to be made. I mean, imagine being able to give somebody a phone number and get 3,000 each time to get a bit of work. So, he was making a phenomenal amount of money. They had a phenomenal lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it was all over like that.
Yeah.
He's another 4 years to serve. We can only imagine when he gets back out of prison, he's not going to be able to set up his haulage firm again or involve himself in the transporting of drugs again.
No.
Certainly, if he does, he will have a bit greater eye on him of the law, because he has this conviction. He's known, obviously, and he'll be watched closely. What he has accumulated, certainly a good proportion of it, is going to have to be handed over to the authorities.
Yeah.
So where does that leave him after 20 years?
Well, I mean, at least he's got a skill, I suppose, in that, he probably can.
Who's going to hire him to drive, transport anything?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
And I mean, his licence and his, especially coming from the UK into Ireland now, obviously you have to go through border controls and passports and all the rest of it. I just don't see legitimate companies hiring a guy like him. I don't see him being able to set up his business as he had it. He's obviously going to have plenty of connections within that world because he was so long in it.
Yeah.
But he's starting again, and he doesn't look like a guy that, is particularly fit to start again, to start afresh. I mean, imagine you or I, after as long as we've worked and the little we have accumulated in life, but nonetheless, it's what we have, and that being taken overnight.
Yeah.
Everything.
No,
and thrown into jail for 7 years, coming back out, older, and...
Yeah, I mean...
It's a big loss,
It's a big loss. I mean, obviously, there's some people who get, who maybe have suffered from addiction and ended up involved in organised crime. and they may have a different type of life than if they go into recovery, and they may have a different kind of way to spend their energy and their drive. Because, of course, some of these guys who end up at the top of the organised crime structure, like, they have that risk-taking and they are driven. And so somebody like Thomas Maher, if he comes out, is he going to get a job in a cafe or, sweeping the streets or whatever? I think that's really why these guys struggle then to go straight, because they're going to have to really lower their expectations of how they will live, what sort of job they will do.
They can't even consider, an average, a normal salary.
No.
With that kind of money that they were making. I mean, it's a lot easier to go up the ladder than to come back down when it comes to getting paid an amount. I mean, I'm sure you know as well, like, you talk to people who've been in that world, many of them who still are in it, and like what we would work hard to get and to aspire to, they can buy in the blink of an eye. Yeah. Their attitudes to money, to work, to hard work as they call it, are so different to the normal world that you wonder, is there any way they can fit in?
Yeah, because it's kind of a personality type thing, where it's not just the money. Like, they also like the status, and also maybe even the risk taking and the buzz of being involved in crime, which is a big part of it. Like, it's not just the money.
Well, I think it's a drug.
Yeah. So
that idea of beating the system of, I'm sure the rush that you get even as a truck driver at that end of the market. I'm not even talking about King of the Road, Thomas Maher, who organises the stuff. I'm talking about actually driving it, and that you're being told you're going to get 5,000 for bringing something in, and you get it through customs, and you drive on, and you get out of your car, and you get handed the money. There has to be a buzz in that.
Exactly. And why does somebody want that type of buzz? Some people don't want it. Like, they want to.
Yeah, it would terrify them.
Yeah, so it does leave a hole in the soul, does it? And how are you going to fill that when you come out? I mean, are you going to get that from, doing your gardening or going for long walks in the evening? I don't know, and that's why people struggle to walk away from organised crime. I don't think it's just the money. I think it's the whole combination of things. Some people do, of course, build a second life, and some people really do change, like, they changed being in prison, or maybe, as I said, coming out of addiction. They can really change their personality, but other people really, really struggle, and they tend to go back one more time to try it again.
They do, or else just go back because they need X amount for the retirement, or they just need to make this amount.
This idea of
somebody there this week that was caught, and they had absolutely sworn that it was their last job.
Yeah.
The last job they were going to do, and then they were set up and bang.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to walk away, and you can understand maybe why it is, but I think in order to really change, like, people have to change. And of course prison does reform some people, just not all.
No, and the other thing is that while he has no convictions in relation to trafficking of people and those Vietnamese people. He was arrested in connection with it. There was connections between him and Ronan Hughes. Well, he has no convictions for that. I think it also shows that everything is a commodity in the underworld.
Yeah.
Humans, drugs, money, alcohol, whatever it is you're moving, that a lot of the guys that are working in those sort of mid-range jobs, the logistics managers and all the rest of it, they have to have the ability to just see human beings as a commodity too.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I
don't know how you'd get to that place.
Well, I think it's I think some of it is that kind of anti-establishment feeling where you're trying to beat the system all the time, and you come to believe that the system is more morally wrong than you are. And you see a lot of that actually, even with when we saw Christy Kinahan's LinkedIn posts. I mean, hundreds of them.
Oh, yeah.
And it really was, a sort of an insight into his mind, which really was that the state, the government, whatever way you want to look at it, they were the real bad guys. And any way
the media. Don't forget the media, because the media are lying to everyone, aren't they?
Yeah, the media.
In this organised way.
Yeah, the media are a wing of the government. And any way that you can beat them is kind of a moral action, I think.
As an aside there, in January, Ronan Hughes from Armagh, the guy who was sentenced to 20 years in 2021, I think.
Yeah.
He's also been told that he'll serve another 2 years on top of that sentence if he doesn't pay up a figure of money to the families of the 39 people found dead in the container after the attempt to smuggle them to the UK. 180,000 he has to pay to the families. Now, how they came up with that sum is unclear. Certainly they looked at his assets, they looked to see what he could afford, I suppose. I mean, there's no point in, like, the American way, pay 100 million to each of these 39 people. There's money that they're sort of
seem to pick it out of nowhere.
Pick it out of nowhere. So in this case, I suppose, and maybe in the likes of Vietnam, an amount of money would go further than it would.
Yeah.
I think we know it would, so maybe that's. But yeah, he has been told to get that money to them, or his jail time will be increased, which is interesting, isn't it? Because it is actually a culmination there of a proceeds of crime case in a way, because his assets had to be investigated.
Yeah.
Plus the kind of handing it directly to the victims.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was. Look, it was a horrific case if you look back on it,
As opposed to going into the state, like.
Yeah, it is. It is. It just shows you the different system.
There'd be a lot of people who would sort of say about the Criminal Assets Bureau that, over the years, I mean, I don't know how it could be done, but that certainly some things that are seized from within a particular community, could the money not go back into the community and perhaps into the, into voluntary groupings within the community and everything? Be great if that could happen.
Yeah.
In many cases.
I mean,
you look at Liam Byrne's house in Crumlin that all that drug money went into, and what are they going to get for it? They're not going to get what he spent on it, but.
I mean, it hasn't been sold, of course, despite the fact that there's a housing crisis, maybe for an obvious reason. I think the Criminal Assets Bureau are doing a lot of local operations that you've written about, where they're targeting people within sort of individual counties or individual communities that aren't like Daniel Kinahan level. They're kind of smaller fish, and I think it would be a really good thing if that money seized could go back into the community. We've had cab operations in places like in the Midlands or in County Clare, and I think that would really be a positive thing.
Look, change is always good, and maybe that kind of idea that some of the money at least could go back more directly to the victims rather than just straight into the exchequer, into the slush fund that it does go into, would be something that everybody could have a look at in years to come. Yeah. It's certainly, I always think it sounds like a really good idea, and would really make, I think, it would be the cherry on the pie of the Criminal Assets Bureau if they could some way give it straight back into the a bit like yourself.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's one of my stories for later.
It's a little story. I'd say that one I was described as the cherry on top of the pie of the live Crime World show, which is by an
admirer.
Yeah.
Shall we say?
Yeah.
Right.
Why not?
Well, listen.
Is it not true?
I'm sure it is true. Sure, of course you are.
Yeah.
The rest of the stories I shall keep for a more private setting of the office and those who are anxiously awaiting me to start. But yeah, Thomas Maher, eh?
Thomas Maher.
Not a happy bunny, I'd say.
No. Like a kind of a wasted life, ultimately, to amass all of that stuff and see it ripped off you,
Yeah, but he was a greedy,
but a kind of a wasted life, and obviously a person of not inconsiderable talent and ability, And
ability in what?
Well,
fixing.
Yeah. Somebody like, could he not have ran a successful transit company and maybe been a bit less wealthy? Because he obviously could run a successful business, and it is a waste.
Provide employment and.
Yeah. Maybe had spent 10,000 on holidays instead of 90,000, and he could have, looked forward to a nice retirement and a happy family life, and that's all been taken from him due to his own greed.
Okay, on that philosophical note, Niall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.